Well, good afternoon, boys and girls. So, we've got lots of new things to learn, new choruses to learn, new stories to hear, new memory verses to learn as well. We've got a very favourite or a very common one that we're going to get started with first. So our very first chorus then is, take my hand and follow me. Right, take my hand and follow me. Do you know the actions for this one? Yeah. Right, there's a couple of new people. Don't worry, but you can pick them up as you go along. So when we do take my hand and follow me, you cross over arms and you take the hand of the person next to you. Don't worry if the person next to you is busy. We can hold on to that for another time. Right, so you cross over hands, take my hand and follow me, and then it's to see the sea walker. Get my words right. The blind man healer, the leper cleansing man of Galilee. When we get to Galilee, you all shout, Galilee. You do, right? And we sing this through a couple of times or more, but let's see if we get along. So take hands with everybody next to you, the person next to you, if you can, and we'll get started. You ready? Maybe we get a wee bit faster as we go along as well. I haven't done this one for a long time. Does everybody know this one? No. So, who's watched The Sound of Music? Yeah, most folks will know the tune for The Sound of Music. Well, this is the tune to Do a Deer, a female deer, Ray, a drop of golden sun. But we sing it with different words because we sing S-A-V-I-O-U-R. I was just checking that was right. It is. But what we do is, we're going to make our bodies into letters, right? So we do S's, right? So an S is like a snake. So we've got an S. Yes? An arm and a leg gives us an S. Oh dear, right. So we know what an S is. An A. A V. No, we're not doing YMCA. That's a completely different song, Penny. Completely different song. Right, so we're doing an S, an A, a V, an I, an O, a U. Now, how do we an R? Right, so stand up on your feet and we'll do this one. Now, the tune's actually relatively slow, so we should be able to do it as we're going along. Right, I've got an old song, only as old as maybe 5 weeks ago, because I've decided that we're going to refresh our minds with the books of the Bible. Now, we've memorised all the books of the Bible all the way through, and you did really, really well, which I was really pleased with. So this week, I said I wasn't going to really start anything new, but I wanted to do a refresher. Make sure you hadn't forgot them over the 5 weeks you've been on holiday. Well, if you sing really well, you might get another refresher. Wait till we see. Right, are we going fastest? Yeah. Are you sure? Yeah. Now, don't worry if you don't know all the books of the Bible. It's taken the boys and girls in the Sunday school here nearly a year to learn all the books of the Bible, because we did it over 2 sessions with the Old Testament first, and then we did the New Testament over the second session. So it's taken them almost a year to get it all together. So don't worry if you can't keep up. We will every so often go back and do this chorus, and you can pick up the books of the Bible. Right, we're going fastest? Yeah. Absolutely? Yeah. Definitely sure? Yeah. Right, okay, let's do the fastest. Let's see if you can keep up then. Let's do another reminder one. This one is the one that we learned, the new song that we learned the last time, with the different parts in it. Boys then, that includes the adults, I need you to help me out by singing the white parts, and the girls, you can sing the pink parts when they appear to do the different section of the chorus of the song. Are you ready? Yeah. You sure? Yeah. Okay, let's sing this one then. Right, memory verse time. How good is your memory? The very last verse that we memorised said what? Let's just memorise this one, because you know, a lot of the stories we were doing when we were learning this verse, that was the real theme of the lessons. And you know, as we're going to think about our new character today, this is exactly what his experience was as well. So let's put it up on the screen. Behold, that just means to pay attention to what's coming next. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2. Now, this is very important because God does have a plan for our lives. And we saw in the people, the characters that we were thinking about in the last set of stories we did, we thought about how God was working in their lives. And God is still working in the lives of men and women, boys and girls, even today. Let's say this memory verse over, memorise it for next week, and you might get another refresher bar if you can say it for next week. Okay, we might. I'm not sure how quickly we'll change on to a new memory verse, but we'll see how well everybody can say this one next week and then take a view thereafter. So let's get started. Everybody together. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2. Let's say it again. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2. Let's do this chorus now. I haven't done this one for quite a wee while, so we'll see how we go. Did you ever talk to God above? This is talking about praying, and well, it's important or relevant to our story today because the man that we're going to think about does an awful lot of praying, and we'll think a wee bit more about him as we do this one as well. So let's see if we can sing this one. Here's another one that we do know and that we all love to do, and the adults love the actions too, because they can always keep up, can't they? Yes. Right, well, let's see if we can all keep up with the actions of this one. Everybody knows the actions, yes? Yes, I'm getting a few nodded heads. Okay, don't worry, if you've not been before, you'll quickly pick them up as we go along. Let's sing this one then. God can do anything.
God can do anything, anything at all. God can do anything, anything at all. Nothing is too big for him and nothing is too small. God can do anything, anything at all. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. God can do anything, anything at all. God can do anything, anything at all. Nothing is too big for him and nothing is too small. God can do anything, anything at all. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. God can do anything, anything at all. God can do anything, anything at all. Nothing is too big for him and nothing is too small. God can do anything, anything at all. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. Don't put him in a box, don't shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. God can do anything, anything at all. God can do anything, anything at all. Nothing Nothing is too big for him and nothing is too small. God can do anything, anything at all.
Don't put him in a box and shove him in a corner. Don't you limit what he can do. Don't put him in a box and shove him in a corner. Don't limit what he can do. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, where's the third one? Missed the third drum beat. Oh, never mind. Right, that's got you all exercised out. You got all ready. Now we need to have a wee shuffle in your seat. Make sure you're sitting comfortable, because today we are thinking of a new character. Now, we've been thinking of people in the Old Testament. And we've gone through some of the stories that we know. We've gone through Moses. We've gone through, who else? David, Samuel. Who else have we covered? Noah. Well, that's a wee bit further back than that. We've covered Abraham and Isaac. There's loads of people we've covered all the way through. Now we're getting further into the Bible, and we're thinking of other men. Now this man, well, let's not introduce this man just yet, because there's two other characters we need to introduce first. And in our story, it starts with a king and a queen. We have, in our pictures today, we have King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Now, King Ahab was king over Israel, and his queen ruled with him, Jezebel, and Queen Jezebel was from an entirely different country. But, well, they got married. They weren't supposed to, but they did. And Ahab, well, the Bible tells us a little bit about Ahab. Ahab was a king who, the Bible says, did evil in the sight of God. He did things that were really bad. But do you know what it tells us about Ahab? It tells us this: not only that Ahab was a bad man, he was the worst that had ever been. What a terrible king he really was. I don't think it was a particularly bad king. What he did was really bad, because God, if you remember way back to Moses, God had rescued the people out of Egypt, taken them through the wilderness, brought them to a new country, and said, "It's your land, go and occupy it." And, well, the people didn't quite do what God told them to do. And sometimes, instead of worshipping God, they worshipped idols. They worshipped the god of Baal. And there was a whole lot of other gods that they worshipped. Well, Ahab was no different to them. And he set up idols to Baal and some of the other gods. And where his wife came from, she had a different set of gods. And they set up idols to them. They just did what was awful in the sight of God. And his wife was there with him, and you know, they plotted some horrible things. Anybody that trusted in God or believed in God, they found ways to just cause trouble. Some of them they were tortured, some of them they had killed, some of them they beat up, some of them they starved. They were just awful people. But you know, it might have been an awful time to live, and thinking about our memory verse, God being salvation, God still had a plan. And God sent a man to speak to Ahab and Queen Jezebel. King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Now, he's not really got nice royal robes on him, has he? He's looking a bit bedraggled, isn't he? Well, this man's name is, remember this, Elijah. Okay, remember Elijah. And Elijah, he was a prophet of God. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that God spoke through this man called Elijah. God would speak to Elijah, and Elijah would relay the message on to whoever the message was intended for. And, well, Elijah came and he met with Ahab and Jezebel, and he said to them, "You have been evil in the sight of God. And because you have been evil, you need to be punished." And King Ahab was like, "Well, whatever. It's just God, whatever." But actually, God did actually punish them. But he didn't punish Ahab and Jezebel directly. He spoke to Elijah, and he said to Elijah, he said, "Tell them that there will be no rain or dew will fall in this country." Now, we have to go a bit further in the Bible to find out how long it was. But 3.5 years. Now, in Scotland, we get lots of rain, don't we? Just in the last couple of days, we've had places being flooded by the amount of rain. And if you go to Africa, well, they don't get an awful lot of rain, but they get some. And they need that little some that they get in order for the crops and the bits and pieces to survive. But imagine going 3.5 years without anything. No rain, no dew, no water. That's pretty rough. You couldn't just go to the tap and turn it on and get some water out. There was nothing there. And so Elijah said to Ahab and Jezebel, he says, for 3.5 years there will be no rain will fall on this entire country. 3.5 years. And King Ahab said, whatever. He wasn't really that bothered. He didn't believe Elijah. He just thought, no, there's no way. It's just natural. Clouds, rain, falls. Natural. No way. But God was working. And God, after Elijah had spoken to Jezebel and Ahab, he left the palace and he went away. And God said to Elijah, Elijah, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go beside the brook Cherith. And he said, I want you to go there and I want you to stay there. And Elijah says, but what for? He said, because I want you just to do something for me. And so Elijah took himself off. After God had spoken to him, he took himself off and he went and he camped beside the brook Cherith. Now, I don't know whether he had a tent or whether he just lived under the stars. But anyway, Elijah went beside the brook Cherith. Now, you can see a brook here. Just a small trickle of water that ran down through the valley. And so Elijah went and he sat beside the brook Cherith. Now, he didn't have a mobile phone that he could Uber a McDonald's or Just Eat a takeaway. He didn't have anything like that in those days. And he couldn't just nip to the shops, because that wasn't how it worked either. How was Elijah going to be fed? This brook Cherith was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the middle of a valley. It wasn't in a city. It wasn't near a town. It wasn't anywhere near people populated. It certainly wasn't anywhere near shops. And Elijah was told to go there by God. And Elijah did it. But you know, God said to Elijah, Elijah, I know it's in the middle of nowhere. And I know that there's no shops. And I know that you don't have an awful lot of food with you. He said, but I'll feed you. Elijah says, God, how are you going to feed me? He says, every morning and every night, I will send ravens with food. Now you can see in the picture there, the artist has got a picture of the ravens bringing food and bread. Now it tells us that they brought bread and meat. So I don't know whether he made a sandwich or what he made, but the ravens brought food to Elijah. And Elijah survived on the food that was brought to him by the ravens. Now what did he do for a drink? What do you think, Penny? He had water from the brook. That's exactly what he did. And that was exactly what God told him to do. God said, I'll bring you food by the ravens, but you drink of the water from the brook Cherith, and that will sustain you. Well, yes, Jaden.
Wouldn't that carry diseases?
Not in those days. In those days, fresh water was generally fresh water, and it would have been okay to drink. A lot of freshwater rivers that you have today are still okay to drink. The only problem sometimes you get is when farmers use fertilizers in the field and eventually ends up in the water and then it becomes a bit more dodgy. But generally, fresh water, as long as it's running fresh water, is okay to drink. Now, what was happening while Elijah was by the brook Cherith? What did God promise was going to happen? Sophie? No rain for 3.5 years. Now, what happens if the river that starts away up here doesn't get rain? The river will dry up. And the Bible tells us that while Elijah was there and while Elijah was being fed, the river, there's the picture there of them being fed by the ravens, the river eventually dried up. Now, what was he going to do? Well, God still fed him. God still sent the ravens every morning and every night time, and they brought him bread and meat. Now, that's the artist's impression of the bread and meat. I don't know what it would be like. If you've seen ravens before, I'm sure they're very much like magpies, except they're all black. And ravens are known as scavengers. Has anybody got a dog? Do they scavenge for food? Like, do they sit at you and beg, try to get food off you? Well, your cat does the same as well. Well, ravens are a bit like that. They find whatever they can. You ever heard the expression roadkill? Yes, where a bird or an animal or something's been run over by a car. Well, that's what ravens feed off of. They feed off of roadkill. And Well, I don't know whether that was what these ravens brought. I suspect that God made them bring real, proper food to Elijah, not just roadkill, as we would see ravens eat today. But God sustained Elijah by the brook. Now you can see there the levels dropped in the water and it's getting shallower, and eventually the water did indeed run dry. The brook Cherith ran dry. There was no brook. There was just a big bit of ground in the middle. You can see it there. I think that's the artist's impression of him walking on the brook Cherith. And certainly if that was the brook there, there's no water. Not only is there no water, do you know what these are? These are cracks in the soil. When the soil gets so dry, it cracks open. It starts to shrink. And eventually God said to Elijah, Elijah, I asked you to deliver a message to Ahab, and you delivered that message. 3.5 years, no rain. He said, now I have told you to go and sit by the brook Cherith, and I will have fed you, and I'll have watered you, and you've done that. He said, you've been faithful to what I asked you to do. He says, but I've got one more thing to ask you to do. One more thing. He says, you can't sit by here. There's no water. I'm going to send you to a place, and there someone will look after you. And if you come back next week, we'll find out who it is.
You're joking.
I'm not joking. Because that's next week's story. But Elijah, he was obedient to God. And, well, Elijah could safely say that God was his salvation. Because as he was sitting by the brook Cherith, if those ravens hadn't brought him food and he hadn't been able to drink from that river, he would have died. But Elijah trusted in God. And the memory verse says, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. And that's exactly what Elijah did. He trusted in God. He wasn't afraid, maybe a little apprehensive. How am I going to survive? But he did. He trusted in God. And so God had kept him, and he was his salvation. And then when we think of next week's story, where we find that Elijah sent somewhere, you'll see again just how God was his salvation. Yes, Jaden?
Yeah, but wouldn't all the other people be sacrificed because they wouldn't have any words and they were innocent, so they just died?
Well, this was the challenge that God had, because the people were bad. The king was bad, the queen was bad, and the people of the city were bad. And God has to punish things that are bad. That's why you and I get punished. If we do something wrong, that's why we get punished. And it was the same in those days as well. Right, we shall see you all next week. Thank you for coming. If you're just new, even more thank yous for coming. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week.